All right, Mike Breen is here, the voice of the 2021 Eastern champion New York Knicks. You.
If you're calling for finals tickets, get in line, pal. Because I might have some if it goes to a sixth or seventh game, but there's no way to first couple of games.
It's been a crazy last 10 months for you as a broadcaster. I'm guessing things that you weren't expecting. Out of all the things that you did expect last 10 months, were the Knicks to be as good as the Nets through the first 3 weeks of the season. This makes no sense.
I really felt they'd be improved just because of the coaching change, because Tom Thibodeau I'm so high on, but not like this to the point. The last telecast I did, I looked at Clyde Frazier, I think, on the air, and I said, who are these Knicks? It's unbelievable. It's so much fun, but it's also so sad because, as you know, Knick fans they're as loyal as any fan base in any sport. And for them to finally have a good team and not be able to go to the Garden, I am praying that at some point this season they'll be able to go and watch them play in person.
And it's the kind of team they would like because it's just a bunch of hardworking dudes who gave a shit, which is, I think, intentionally put together. They brought in Leon Rose and Worldwide West and Tibbs, and they seem like they're pretty devoted to building a culture. They didn't go chase free agents. Gordon Hayward was the only one they really went after. And then the price went way out of whack on that. And then they were just like, you know what? We like the guys we have here. There's guys with good pedigree. We're going to try to build around these guys and add people who play really hard. Even somebody like Rivers, who has bounced around, has been in big games and has a real swagger to him. But this team makes sense to me when I watch it. When did it make sense to you as you were watching it?
Well, just you could see even in the preseason, guys that I've watched before play differently. Maybe not like enormous jumps out of the screen at you, but you could see they were playing differently. And I mean, you know this, so often in terms of when you acquire players or get players, what time of their career are you getting them? Because they're not ready sometimes to do certain things. Isaiah Thomas had one of the great lines years ago, the Hall of Fame Isaiah Thomas, when he said, young players define their games by how many points they score. And that's so true. And to this day, there still is, obviously exceptions. But for so many players, they want to establish themselves. And really, he talks about as you go later on in your career, you establish your game or establish your name by how many wins your team has. And just look at two guys like Julius Randle and Elfrid Payton, okay? If you asked Knicks fans last year who are the two guys they wanted off the team, they may have been 1 and 2. But these guys, neither one of them have ever been to the postseason. Now you get a coach who comes in who's so demanding and has, the pedigree and the track record. All of a sudden, your agenda is changed. You don't want to, score 25 points a night, even though Randle is. You want to win basketball games. And so much of it is about the timing of when you acquire a player.
Well, and they have pedigree guys too, right? And that's why I've been fascinated. I've watched a lot of their last 5 games because I've been fascinated by Randle, who I really liked in college, who I thought, it was Embiid and Wiggins. I thought Embiid was the most talented guy. I did the draft that year. But I thought Randle was going to be a reliable 2010 guy. And I remember the Celtics, it was basically between Smart and Randle for that pick. And I thought Randle was going to be good. He breaks his leg with the Lakers. He's on those weird Laker teams. He starts bouncing around. And then eventually I kind of gave up on him. I just thought he was a black hole who was on a bunch of bad teams with a bunch of mediocre to worse coaches. And now it's too late. But as it turns out, not too late. I never saw the passing from him. I mean, that the thing that's shocking, and I'm sure you feel the same watch as you're announcing, like the all-around game for him this year, I don't know where it came from. Where do you think it came from?
It's tremendous. And I agree with you. The rep was starting to be, guy could put up empty stats for any poor team.
Yeah.
But you still, to score 20 points a night, no matter who you play for, you have to have some real ability. And now when you bring into a coach that demands that you make the right decision, you make the pass. And he's not just telling them, he is drilling that into them.
Yeah.
Guys see the game a different way. Elfrid Payton was telling a story the other day how if he's running a drill or running, the set plays, and he doesn't like, I'm talking about Thibodeau, he doesn't like the way it's run, he will run it 100 consecutive times until it's in your head. So they haven't had that before. I've heard the word demanding from every player on the roster multiple times when they're being interviewed. And again, not every player wants to be coached that way. And coaches like players, a lot of it is fit. Right now, with this team, with this roster, he's the perfect fit because he's an elite coach if he has those guys who want to follow him and want to do what he says.
Well, so he's got Randle, who he's unlocked. Barrett, who I never gave up on. You know, he comes in as a rookie. The team's got 1 million point guards, terrible situation. And then the bubble, they're not in it, obviously. The pandemic ends the season early. He doesn't even get that last 20 games to try to get, you know, his stats, get his sea legs a little bit. But, you know, I remember Nash is close to him. And Nash was always telling me, that kid's going to make it because he really gives a shit. Like he is going, whatever his deficiencies are in his game, he'll keep working at him. I think what we're seeing this year is a guy, he'll have games when he just can't make a shot, but he's going to play hard. He's going to do stuff. He's going to affect things on both sides. I just think he's a keeper. I really like him.
I do too. I don't know if he's going to be a perennial all-star or a 3 or 4 time all-star. I don't know that yet, but he's determined. That's the word I use for him because he's got that work ethic. Last year, he played a team that had horrible point guard play and 0 perimeter shooting. Impossible for him to succeed. Plus, he had a Julius Randle who kind of did the same things that he did. It was almost impossible for him to succeed last year. This year, you just see a different, more confident player. He's still only 20 years old.
Yeah.
He's going to be fine. His shot is better. He still has to cut down on the 1 for 10 3-point nights. But he's got to get better because he's got the determination to do it.
And it feels like they've unlocked Robinson a little bit too, who I think everybody liked, but you know, he falls in the draft because people aren't sure about his maturity, things like that. I've heard good things about him the last couple of years, but you see him, he's somebody that can play in crunch time as a shot blocking 5 against good teams, and he can rebound in traffic. He can protect the rim. He can do little screen and rolls and things like that. So when you watch them in crunch time, the team actually makes sense, especially if, like in the case yesterday where Rivers comes in and just has a heat check in the 4th quarter. I feel like they're not going to really tinker too much with this. I think,
no.
and I said this before when it didn't work out for them in the offseason, that it was like, hey, Knicks fans, this is actually good for you. You're not getting these free agents. You're not getting the marquee dudes every year. You got to build from the ground up. You got to build a culture. You got to build around a coach, and you got to kind of rejuvenate these dudes that have pedigree over like constantly hoping Karl Anthony Towns is going to be available or maybe Devin Booker. Like you just got to get out of that. And it feels like they finally snapped out of it, right?
Yeah. To me, the number one priority this year was get to a point where you win more games. That's number one. You had to win more games. You can't have another season where you win 22 games or 25 games in an 82-game season. So you win more games. You start to show, okay, this team competes. When you go play them, they're a tough team to beat. You're always going to be in a fight. So now opposing players now start to see, okay, this franchise is in the right direction. And just as importantly, agents are now seeing it and hearing from their players. Now the message gets out, boy, the Knicks are on the right path. The Knicks they're a pretty good place to go. Because regardless of what anybody says, and I know I'm a lifetime New Yorker, so I might not be completely objective, but that is still the number one venue for players on the road to go play in. It still means go play in that building. And eventually, when you build it back to a point where it is a destination that you have a chance to be on a really good team, I think they've got a chance to really take off again.
The reason I think this is smart, the way they're doing it, the reason why I think it can work, I saw it happen. You know, I love to bring everything back to a Boston team. I saw this happen with the Celtics in 2014 and 15 and 16, where they make that trade for all the Brooklyn picks. They basically gut the team. They get rid of Garnett and Pierce. They trade Rondo. And it's like, oh, all right, it's time to tank. Here we go. But they also had Brad Stevens, who is, you know, he's going to build a culture. He's going to get guys to overachieve. And they really started putting something together. And they had certain types of players, and he had the ability to take somebody, I don't know, like Jay Crowder, who seemed like just this added dude in the Rondo trade. And all of a sudden, he's a valuable dude. Evan Turner, a guy much like a Julius Randle type now, like a high lottery pick, great pedigree, who hadn't really made it. All of a sudden, he comes in. He looks pretty good. And so on and so on. And they built a team that overachieved and became a place that other people want to play. All of a sudden, we get Al Horford in 2016. We hadn't signed a free agent in 20 years, you know. Right. And then then all of a sudden Kyrie the next year is like, cool. Kyrie trade, Gordon Hayward's coming, and then you start getting people. And I think what you said, that's the key, and that's the thing most teams miss is like build the culture, start winning games, start overachieving, and then people want to come to that.
But to do that, I mean, you bring up Brad Stevens, and that's exactly was the key. Same thing with Thibodeau. It makes a difference. I remember years ago, Billy Packer was being interviewed. And one year, Billy Packer, of course, the great college basketball analyst, he worked NBA games for the playoffs for CBS. And I had him on a talk show, and I asked him, what was the biggest surprise from the NBA game? And he told me that the importance of coaching. He goes, I had no idea how much more important a coach is in the NBA than it is in college. He said a coach in the NBA makes more decisions in one game than a college coach would make in probably 2 weeks worth of games in terms of in-game decisions and adjustments. And I'll never forget that. And I've always felt that throughout. This is now my 29th year calling NBA games. I'm not saying that a great coach can take a talentless team and win a title. That's not going to happen. And an average coach can take a team loaded with talent to a title. That can happen. But when you have a great coach that's going to maximize your team's ability and maximize potential, it's all the difference in the world. And I really believe that Thibodeau has been and is an elite coach.
Yeah, it's funny. I loved him in Chicago. I thought year after year, some of the stuff he did, especially with how they were afraid to spend money and some of the financial decisions they made with their roster, which really undermined them. And they had a lot of bad luck. The Derrick Rose thing was just horrific luck, goes to Minnesota. And for that 1 year, at least, he turned them into a successful team. And that was a team you look back now and it's like, I don't know if Towns is a real franchise guy. We certainly have our answer with Wiggins. Butler's on there. But for the most part, you could argue that team overachieved. But when he went to the Knicks, I just wasn't sure if his style worked anymore because the league has changed so much the last 7 years, and you think like even that when we were in the Miami, Indiana series that we both worked and how important Roy Hibbert was 7 years ago, and being able to play Roy Hibbert and David West together and things like that. And now the league is just different. And it's so much more about spacing and threes and offense. I didn't know if he'd be able to adjust to it. But it seems like his style still works. That's my takeaway from the first 3 weeks.
Well, his style is still preaching play together, share the ball, help each other. And that's still, it's still the most beautiful time to watch basketball is when 5 guys are working together and are just kicking the butt of the opponent because of their ability to work together. People always ask me about what's the favorite championship or what's the favorite finals that I've called. And there's always the Game 7. I'll never forget the first Game 7 I did in 2010, 2016. Those Game 7 are phenomenal. 2013 with the Spurs and the Heat. But one of my favorite teams of all time was that 2014 Spurs team that came back the next year and just, sliced up the Miami Heat in those finals. That was the best passing exhibition I've ever seen in all my years watching basketball. And when you share the ball, when you've got 5 guys working together, it just not only it looks beautiful, but it's so effective. But the key this year for them, like if they started 0-6, lost a couple of close ones in a 0-6, now guys are wondering. But when you start and gain some victories, and now there's what he's saying works, that trust factor just skyrockets, and it makes all the difference in the world.
And I think one thing they're going to be really careful about is to not always have stories being leaked about, hey, they might be interested in this guy. Well, if this guy, I think they're going to be really, really careful about, these are our guys this year. We have no illusions. We're going to try to make the playoffs with this group, and we'll worry about next summer when it happens. But I think that's a trap that some of the big market teams have fallen into over and over again, where it's constantly there's some apple being dangled far away that you end up concentrating on that versus just, this is how I feel with the Celtics right now. It's like, I just want to root for Tatum and Brown for the next 10 years. Can you sign me up for that? I don't want to hear, stop sending me like James Harden trade rumors. Like I have 2 guys I love rooting for who are awesome guys on and off the court. That's it. Just they're off the table.
If people don't think that has an impact on a player's head and his performance, they're out of their minds. And the Knicks are going to do it because if Randle keeps playing like this and say Obi Toppin comes and he starts to play well, there's going to be rumors of him being dealt all the time. and that has an impact on players. I mean, look what has happened over just in the past couple of years, how it could destroy teams in terms of how guys. There's no question. Some guys can deal with it, but a lot of guys, are you kidding me? That's the human nature of this is so undervalued so many times that when you see your name in a trade rumor and you think, okay, I'm living in LA and playing for the Lakers, I might be going here, and that plays with your head. And I couldn't agree more. And I think they've. Well, I shouldn't say they've learned from that, because for Leon Rose, it's his first time doing this job. But Leon Rose, he's not talking very much. So there's not going to be leaks from the front office coming on stuff like that.
Those guys aren't talking at all. And I think it seems like they're trying to replicate a little like what Calipari did in Kentucky, right? Like they even brought Kenny Payne over as one of the coaches. I forget the name of the other assistant coach that they brought.
Johnny Bryant.
Johnny Bryant. They spent real money on two guys because – I think part of what they're trying to do isn't just build a basketball team. They're trying to develop people. They're trying to develop personalities. And I think one of the things that's always impressed me with that Kentucky thing over the years is those guys are only there for a year, most times, if they're good, right? But it's a very close-knit group regardless. And it really does feel like a culture that Calipari built. And I think they're trying to build it with the Knicks.
And you bring in Thibodeau, who's a tough, demanding coach. So you have to know that the players you bring in are going to be okay and be able to deal with it. Kentucky, John Calipari is a tough, demanding coach. And there's no BS to Cal. I mean, he goes at them, but he also treats them like men. So these guys that they can deal with Calipari, they can deal with a Thibodeau. Same thing like an RJ Barrett. Mike Krzyzewski, for as smooth as he is, and his great reputation, he's a tough, demanding coach. So RJ Barrett, he's going to be able to deal with a guy like Tom Thibodeau because they've had it before. And those guys want to be coached, and they want to be coached hard if it means that they're going to win basketball games.
Well, what a time for New York sports right now. You the Mets swinging the big Lindor Carrasco trade. They have an owner who's finally spending money. Looks like the Jets are going to end up with a quarterback. The Giants have a little momentum. Brooklyn is interesting, even though you can attest to this. I was going to ask you this anyway. There was a little buzz about, the Brooklyn ratings have been better than the Knicks ratings for the first week. It's like, stop. It's a Knicks town. The Nets are never taking New York. It's never happening. There's too many Knicks fans. They're not switching.
No,
just explain that to people.
Hey, there's always one team. Like, I'm a huge Met fan. Crazy. I was almost after the trade came up, I was gonna cancel my appearance today because I needed to go out and celebrate because I'm fired up about my Mets. But even as a lifelong Met fan, it's a Yankee town. I mean, the Mets are great, and the fans love the Mets. And when they're good, the city's abuzz. But it's a Yankee town, and it's the same. Always be a Knick town. Now the Nets, they are fun to watch, and those two players, they're as talented as an offensive duo as the league has, and that includes LeBron and AD. That includes any of them. Those guys, it's amazing what they can do, and it's going to be fascinating. To me, they're one of the real fascinating teams to watch. Because how is that going to play out during the course of a year with these two guys who are both alpha dogs, and then the rest of the team, are they going to stand around and watch? Can they incorporate them all? It's going to be a great watch, and they should be one of the premier teams in the league, but it will always count, always.
The bummer for what you do for a living is you can pick up on some of this when you're there. Like the Brooklyn stuff, the Kyrie KD thing, which bench guys are unhappy. You're sitting courtside. You can actually get a vibe for some of this stuff. I think when you're doing it remotely, you're in the same situation I am at this point. You're just guessing on TV. That's the part I really missed about, and we're going to talk about the bubble after the break, but man, the bubble was so great, but not being there, I really missed the vibe of some of the things. I really wish I could have gone to some of those games. And I know you were behind, like, you were in plexiglass and in a bubble or whatever you were broadcasting from, but at least you had a somewhat of a vibe.
There's so much you miss. It's incredible, and I've learned that very quickly doing some of these games at home. People ask me around the draft time about what do you think of this player? What do you think of that player? And I always say I've never seen him in person, so I'm not going to even evaluate him until you see a guy in person and you see his body language and you see how hard he plays. For me, it's impossible to evaluate, and it's been a challenge trying to call games off a monitor because there's so much normally you pick up that's just not there.
Yeah, you've had a couple where you thought the ball went in, but it was an air ball that hits the net. There was calls you didn't realize happened because how do you know? You're just watching a monitor.
That's why I'm wearing these now. It was a Rockets game, and the corner we were looking at was right like in the corner where the plexiglass attached. And Eric Gordon takes the three, and I confidently say, "Gordon for three, it's good." Eric Gordon from downtown. Is like a second of silence, and Jeff Van Gundy goes, "Mike, it was an air ball."
I was watching. That was hilarious.
I realized I needed glasses, number one, and number two, it's not the same as when you're courtside.